Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. In our exploration of ancient Greek mythology, I told you about the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War, and also the Odyssey. That is to say, the voyage of King Odysseus, also known as Ulysses, from Troy back to his island kingdom, and the adventures of Perseus, Theseus in the labyrinth, and the myth of Prometheus. Tonight we will relive two other stories, two other great myths. Orpheus, the legendary poet and singer, who tried to rescue his wife, Eurydice, from death. And then the quest of Jason and his companions, the Argonauts, to retrieve the Golden Fleece. But first, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project, get more of it, and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish or can, and everyone gets everything that is on our page. Because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will gain access to several exclusive episodes, and also all our episodes with and without background sounds. We offer advance releases to our Patreons as well. We have added links to Patreon as well as links to different streaming options, which may be better suited for you. You will find a link in the description of the episode. You will also find timestamps pinned in the first comment to allow you to restart the story where you left off, in case you fall asleep or wish to resume the story later. But before we begin, let's take a moment together to prepare for our journey ahead. If you'd like, gently close your eyes and let your daily concerns drift away. Find a position that feels natural and cozy. Perhaps make small adjustments until you're perfectly comfortable. Now, draw in a deep, nourishing breath, and as you release it softly, notice how your body responds. Feel the warmth flowing from your shoulders down through your neck, melting away any tension. Let your facial muscles become soft, your jaw loose, your fingers naturally open, and your legs completely at ease. And as you settle into this peaceful state, my voice will be your gentle companion as we begin our exploration together. And now that you're all set, let's begin with our first story, the myth of Orpheus. It happened once in a distant past that two extraordinary beings fell in love and had a son. The father was Apollo, the god of the sun, of light, prophecies, music, dance, and many other things. Such was his importance and inspirational force. The mother was Calliope, the muse of eloquence and epic poetry. She was one of the muses who were the 9 goddesses, 9 sisters, who inspired every kind of knowledge. Their influence spread through all domains of human creativity and inquiry, from literature and science to the various forms of artistic expression. There was a muse behind history, Clio, one behind astronomy, Urania, and muses for tragedy, dance, music, and the different kinds of poetry, epic, lyric, and sacred. Poetry was the highest form of literature, and epic poetry, the telling in verses of the extraordinary doings of the people who gave shape to the mortal universe. This was the most important and prestigious form of poetry, because it gave the poets and their audience an understanding of where they came from, of who they were as people, and as a nation, what their human condition was. But poets were not really a creator by themselves. Their talent was to be able to channel and express the creative flow inspired by the muse. And so, even though there were no ranks between muses, Calliope, as the patron goddess of epic poetry and eloquence, was particularly revered and sometimes called the chief of all muses. Her name meant beautiful voice, and it was well known that her voice was perfectly harmonious. It could plunge any listener into a state of ecstasy and inspiration, which gave her an irresistible charm. Pairing of Apollo and Calliope could only give birth to an extraordinary and talented being, and unsurprisingly, their son, Orpheus, grew up to become a very gifted artist. His mother taught him to make verses, and his father gave him a lyre, a string instrument that would become a symbol of poets and musicians. Orpheus lived near Mount Olympus, where the gods resided, and he created beautiful melodies that nothing and no one could resist. Gods, humans, even animals. He would sing, and wild beasts forgot their nature, forgot their instincts, and came close and listened. The gods also asked him to join them quite often and to sing his creations, which they found delightful. Humans were seduced too, and one day that Orpheus was singing for them, he saw a young woman of great beauty in the crowd. Her name was Eurydice, and she was as beautiful, intelligent, and sweet as he could have dreamed of, and they fell in love. The two were seen together more and more, and Orpheus asked for her hand. She happily accepted, and the marriage took place. All went well on the day of the ceremony, except for one thing. A small god of love, Amen, who had been called to bless the union, made a worrying prophecy, a prediction. He said that their couple was perfection, but that this perfection was not meant to last. Despite this worrying prophecy, they started living together, and they were perfectly happy, as much as they had hoped for. Orpheus kept composing odes and songs, while Eurydice took care of their home, and both enjoyed spending time together in nature, where they forgot everything but themselves. This happy life didn't last long. One day, Eurydice was wandering in the forest near Mount Olympus with a group of nymphs, deities of nature. They all danced and enjoyed the beauty of the forest. But Eurydice forgot that this beauty was not free of danger. Carelessly she ran and stepped on a snake that bit her. A nymph ran to help her, but it was too late. She had died almost instantly. News of the tragedy spread quickly, and Orpheus was plunged into a dark state of pain and sorrow, as deep as his happiness had been intense when Eurydice was alive. He took his lyre and sung his grief and desperation with such heartbreaking expressiveness that all who listened to him could feel his pain almost as theirs. When his sad music rose, even trees, rivers, and rocks seemed to be moved, and from the caves where wild beasts lived, or the humble houses of men, to the top of Mount Olympus, everyone, animals, humans, and the Olympian gods alike, wept and grieved with him. The gods wanted to do something to alleviate or even eliminate his pain, and they appeared to him. They told him that maybe all was not lost. When mortals like Eurydice died, they went to the underworld, the kingdom of Hades, the king of the dead, and of his wife, Persephone. Hades and Persephone never let any mortal soul escape their realm. But maybe they would make an exception for Eurydice and Orpheus. Because even though it was the natural order of things that mortals went to the underworld, the two monarchs of this world also knew love and could be moved by Orpheus's talent. However tenuous the hope, Orpheus was ready to try anything, and he immediately decided to descend to the underworld to see his wife there and bring her back. Hades was no stranger to Olympian gods. He was the elder brother of Zeus and Poseidon. When the three brothers revolted against their parents, Titans Cronus and Rhea, they fought together against the generation of the Titans and the previous generation of gods, and together they won this legendary war, which gave them rulership of the cosmos. They shared it. Zeus took the sky, and also kingship of the gods as the leader of the rebellion. Poseidon took the sea, and Hades took the underworld. The solid earth where humans lived remained available to all three. The three brothers were jealous of their respective possessions, and the two others were generally not welcome in each one's realm. After his descent to the underworld, Hades had taken possession of a vast space that included limbos, where lost souls wandered, and also terrifying regions like Tartarus, where damned souls were condemned to suffering, and also the ideal region, the land of Elysium, where mortals deemed worthy and heroes could spend eternity in the perfection of beautiful gardens where everything was available in abundance. Hades' character had not improved in the depths of the underworld, and he had become a severe, strict ruler. When Zeus and Poseidon and most other Olympian gods indulged in courting mortals, nymphs, and other gods, and enjoying all the pleasures the world could offer, Hades stayed in his underworld realm, always serious, and did not even mix with the other gods who were happy to avoid him. But Hades had not descended alone to this realm. He had fallen in love with the goddess Persephone, the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of agriculture and harvest. Hades wanted to marry Persephone and take her with him to the underworld to make her his queen. Demeter was strongly opposed to this. She didn't want to see her daughter follow Hades to his sinister realm. She was all about growth, life, and the lively force of nature, and she could not accept her daughter to be sent to the kingdom of death. So, with the agreement of Zeus, Hades planned to abduct Persephone. One day, as the young goddess was gathering flowers with nymphs in a field, he suddenly appeared through a cleft in the earth. He took Persephone and brought her to his realm. Demeter didn't know that Hades and Zeus had prepared this abduction, and desperate, she began searching all over the earth for her missing daughter. She was so absorbed in her search that she neglected the earth and no longer nourished it with her life force. So plants stopped growing, and soon famine spread for mankind. The gods were oppressed by hungry people and had to do something to save humanity from starving. Apart from Hades and Zeus, another god knew what had happened, Helios, the sun. And he told Demeter where her daughter was. He had seen Hades capture her. Demeter and many other gods went to Zeus to demand the return of Persephone, and Zeus had no other choice than accept. Hades accepted to comply with the request of all other gods, but he had one last trick under his sleeve. It was written that anyone who had tasted the food of the underworld would be forever bound to it. So before he released Persephone, he gave her seeds to eat. Persephone didn't know the consequences. She ate the seeds and became bound to Hades' realm. When the messenger of gods, Hermes, arrived to retrieve her, she was allowed to return to the surface and be reunited with her mother. But because she had tasted the food offered by Hades, she was forced to return to the underworld and spend half the year there. And so began an eternal cycle. For half a year, Persephone was with her husband in the underworld. During this time, corresponding to fall and winter, trees lost their leaves and plants died or fell asleep. Then the goddess would return to the surface for the other half of the year and spend it with the gods above. And her return started spring and then summer, when plant life resumes, forests and crops grow again. Since then, Persephone had become the personification of vegetation, especially crops, which disappeared into the earth when sown, grew out of it in the spring, and reached maturity in summer, before withering and decaying when the summer ended, and Persephone returned to her underworld home. So, with all this history between the gods and Hades, their relations were not particularly friendly. The gods saw Hades as a sinister and jealous master of the underworld who didn't laugh or enjoy life, and they suspected Hades saw them as frivolous and undeserving of their powers. At least this was what they imagined, because the master of the underworld was not the kind to explain himself or give opinions. However, his love for Persephone and his similar nature to the gods meant that he could possibly be moved by something. and so they hoped that once, just once, he would make an exception for Eurydice and let her come back to the world of the living, to be returned with Orpheus. But for that, Orpheus would have to descend to the world of the dead and plead his case to its king and queen, as it was winter and Persephone was with her husband underground. Entering the underworld as a mortal meant instant death. There was no coming back. But to prevent that, the gods protected Orpheus with a charm that would allow him to survive the journey. At least if Hades decided to let him go, with or without Eurydice. Orpheus traveled to the limit of the world, where the river Styx separated the earth from the underworld, and there his exploration of the world of the dead began. First he had to cross the dark waters of the Styx, and there was only one possibility: Charon the Ferryman. Charon asked to be paid, hence the tradition of leaving a coin in the mouth of the dead before burying them, so that their passage to the underworld would be guaranteed. There were several rivers in the underworld. The Styx was not the only one. There were 5. Actually, the river that separated the earth, Gaia, from the underworld was called Acheron in Greek tradition. It was only later that other authors, especially Romans, made the Styx the frontier of their accounts. The Acheron was also called the River of Woe, and the other rivers, including Lethe, the river of unmindfulness or oblivion, Cocytus, the river of wailing, and the Phlegethon, the river of fire. Drifting on these rivers could take the souls to the most terrifying parts of the underworld, Tartarus. The first occupants to be jailed in Tartarus were the Titans, defeated by Zeus and his allies, the other gods. The Titans had been imprisoned, and their powers were neutralized, but they had not been forgotten. And from time to time, Olympian gods remembered the existence of this threat, asleep in the depths of the underworld, and they worried about another war if one day the furious Titans freed themselves. It was Hades' responsibility to watch Tartarus and make sure the Titans stayed prisoners. Tartarus was also the world where souls were judged after death, and the wicked stayed to receive punishment for their actions on earth. The 5 rivers of the underworld converged to a large center, where their waters had turned into a marsh, and there, at the center, resided Hades. But all was not sinister in Hades' realm. Heroes and those chosen by the gods could spend the afterlife in the Elysian fields, or Elysium. According to more ancient accounts, Elysium was separated from the underworld. It was another world in itself that was not under Hades' rule, and it was exclusively open to heroes and individuals related to the gods. Later accounts made it another region of the underworld, so a part of Hades' realm and the Elysian fields became a paradise also open to the righteous humans deserving of a blessed and happy life there after death, where they could spend reunited with other worthy humans. As he crossed the Styx on Chiron's ferry, Orpheus meditated on these places. He knew that this journey might be his last if he didn't convince Hades to let Eurydice and himself go. But the hope of seeing the love of his life again was strong enough, and his will did not weaken when he set foot on the other bank of the Styx. He found it crowded with ghostly sounds of people unknown, disoriented, who had recently arrived to the underworld and looked for their way, or who had stayed there for centuries, not good enough nor bad enough to be sent to Tartarus or the Elysian fields. On this side also lived Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of the underworld and prevented the dead from leaving. Cerberus was the offspring of monsters and was a giant, ferocious creature that could watch everywhere with its 3 pairs of eyes, and the monster attacked any intruder. Orpheus didn't have the strength or the agility to attack the dog, but he had another kind of power, his music. He had taken his lyre and started to play for Cerberus. The monster had never heard such a sound, and its wild nature was touched by the beauty of Orpheus's song. It calmed down and let the intruder continue his journey to the depths of the underworld. Orpheus crossed caves, deadlands, and dark forests until he reached the center of the underworld and arrived at the palace where Hades and Persephone resided. The god of the underworld was curious about this visitor, the first mortal ever to willingly enter his realm, and with the audacity to ask him for a favor. He knew Orpheus's reputation and asked him to play the lyre and sing for him. Orpheus began to play, channeling his feelings of loss and love for Eurydice with the eloquence and divine harmony that only the Muses could inspire. Hades and Persephone, who was also present, were delighted by this music, and after they had enjoyed it for a long time, the master of the underworld told Orpheus that he understood why he was a favorite of the gods, and that his reputation was well deserved. And because he and his wife had been touched by his plea, he would for once make an exception. Yes, Eurydice would be allowed once, just once, to escape the underworld and return to earth with her husband. But for this, Orpheus would have to show considerable faith, because there was one condition. Eurydice was now a shadow, and only the sunlight would complete her resurrection. She would have to follow behind him while walking out from the caves of the underworld, and Orpheus could not turn to look at her as they walked, not once. Otherwise, if he saw her as a shadow, she would be forever bound to the underworld and forever unable to return to the world of the living. Orpheus listened carefully and was delighted to hear this, because he was a patient man who could control his impulses very well. So he would not turn to see her as long as they would be in the underworld. This was not a difficult task, and they would be reunited. It was now only a matter of time, he thought. Orpheus thanked the gods, Hades and Persephone in front of him, and in prayer all the other gods who had made this miracle possible. Hades told him that Eurydice was now behind him and that he could start walking back to earth. Full of gratitude, Orpheus left to ascend back into the world of the living. He walked and walked. Each footstep made him nearer and nearer to the reunion with Eurydice. and he remembered perfectly her beautiful face and couldn't wait to kiss her and hold her in his arms again. As he advanced through, questions and doubts started to bother him. He knew Hades could be a trickster. He knew how he had abducted and then tricked Persephone. Was he really this glorious hero, the first mortal ever to obtain such a favor from the god of the underworld? Or maybe just the fool who had believed that he could defy the laws of life and death and win? Doubt invaded him. Doubt in the word of the gods. Doubt in himself and his worth. How deserving was he of such a privilege? And were the gods looking upon him with benevolence or laughing at him? Laughing at his naive belief that he had convinced them. Faith was beginning to leave him, vanishing in doubt. He wished he could hear the steps of Eurydice behind him, or her breath. But a shadow cannot make any noise, and he couldn't help but think that he was walking alone. 10 times he was tempted to abandon his last traces of faith and turn his head to see if Eurydice was really behind him. But 10 times he resisted, telling himself that this would ruin his hopes of being reunited, and that he was not allowed to question the word and the instructions of a god. After hours and hours of travel, he finally saw rays of light at the end of the tunnel. The surface was now near. Not knowing whether he was close to the most intense joy or biggest disappointment possible, this had reduced his faith to a small, vacillating flame. And the vision of these rays of light, instead of giving him the strength to make a few extra steps, extinguished the flame. He lost faith, and his entire being was now obsessed with only one question. Was Eurydice really behind him? He needed to know right now. He couldn't wait more. This doubt had become existential and could no longer be controlled. He turned to see whether Eurydice was behind him or not. He saw the beautiful face of Eurydice looking at him with an expression of terror. He understood that Hades had told the truth all along. He understood that the loss of his faith had doomed them both. Now that he had seen her, Eurydice was trapped with Hades forever because he had questioned gods and his own worth, because he had allowed faith to abandon him and let his mind be corrupted by doubt. He had lost everything. The shadow of Eurydice vanished, and all was lost. Orpheus reached the surface, alone and broken. There would be no grief or redemption for him, not for the one who had been too weak and absorbed in his own thoughts. The Olympian gods had watched Orpheus' expedition to the realm of Hades closely and were terribly disappointed in him. He had also learned secrets about the underworld that he could now reveal to humans, and this could not be allowed to happen. The gods sometimes reward exploits, but they have no pity for the one who fails. Zeus decided to strike him with lightning to ensure that he would not tell any secrets. Orpheus's failure also cost him his life, and he returned to the underworld for good, this time as a dead man. Then the gods dispersed and returned to their lives. Only the Muses, who had lost their most treasured poet, had pity on him. They decided to save his head and keep it singing forever. They also retrieved his lyre and cast it into the sky as a constellation, the constellation of the lyre that reminds humans of Orpheus's story, of his talent, of the power of poetry and music, and of the terrible consequences of losing faith in oneself and in the divine. But who knows? Maybe there is a form of forgiveness in this world. Maybe Orpheus and Eurydice were reunited in the underworld and are now together for eternity. Who knows? So, it didn't turn out too well, did it? But don't worry. We have another story to explore tonight, and hopefully, this one will cheer us up. Our second story of the night is the epic of Jason and his companions, the Argonauts, on their quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece. A typical Greek heroic quest with exploits, gods, surprises, choices of all kinds. So let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a king named Aeson who ruled over Iolcus, a city of Thessaly in the middle of Greece. His parents were Cretheus, the founder of Iolcus, who passed it on to his son, Aeson, and Tyro, a princess from Thessaly. Thessaly was disputed between many small kingdoms back then, and inside these kingdoms there were family feuds to seize the thrones. This was the case in Iolcus. Aeson was the rightful heir, but he had a powerful half-brother who was also a demigod, Peleus. They shared the same mother, Tyro, but Peleus's father was Poseidon, the god of the sea. From his divine father, Peleus had inherited considerable strength and ambition. His dream was to unite Thessaly under his rule, and this project began in Iolcus. One day he overthrew Aeson and jailed him in the dungeon of Iolcus, while killing all the descendants of his brother to get rid of competitors, all but one. Aeson's wife had a newborn named Jason, whom she saved from death. As the men of Peleus were searching the palace to kill all children, she made several women gather around the infant and cry as if he were stillborn. The scheme worked. The soldiers went to search in other places, and Jason was saved. But the baby couldn't stay in Iolcus because Peleus would eventually find out about his existence. So the mother sent him away to be taken care of and educated by Chiron, a centaur. On this day, all the descendants of Aeson except Jason died. Chiron was a centaur, and centaurs didn't have a good reputation. But Chiron was different. Like satyrs, centaurs were a mix of human and beast. The lower part of their bodies was like horses, and the upper part was human, torso, arms, and head. Their wild nature made them violent, uncultured, overly indulgent drinkers, lusty. They were not evil, but they had not reached the state of civilization, and that made them unable to form an advanced community like men. But not all centaurs were like that. Charon was an exception. He had been raised by Apollo himself. and the god had helped him rise above his beastly nature. Chiron had learned medicine, music, archery, how to make prophecies, and he was respected among his own kind and among humans too, for his knowledge and skill. He lived in a cave where he perfected his knowledge of herbs and drugs. All this made him the perfect tutor for baby Jason. Chiron could be a moral guide, a role model, and an able teacher who would give him the best possible education and care given the circumstances. And so it was done. Peleus established his rule in Iolcus. Jason grew up far from other humans in the company of the centaur Charon, and 16 years passed. In Iolcus, Peleus had strengthened his grip on power. But the new king feared that his throne could one day be threatened. He knew that he was not the legitimate king, and worried that an heir who might have survived could come for him. His worries were such that he consulted an oracle, who warned him to beware of a man wearing only one sandal. That was a strange prophecy, but still, he demanded to be immediately informed should a man with one sandal enter Iolcus. Jason had become a strong and cultured man thanks to the care and affection of Chiron the Centaur. His tutor had always told him the truth about his origins. He was the rightful king of Iolcus, and one day he would have to return to the kingdom where he was born and claim what was rightfully his. That day came after 16 years. Chiron told him he was now a man, and it was time for him to return to Iolcus and face his destiny. He would be a king, or he would die trying. Jason left his foster father and began his travels to Iolcus. On the way, he had to cross a shallow river, and when he arrived on the bank, an old woman was waiting. She told him she needed to cross, but was afraid that the stream would be too strong for her, and naturally Jason offered to help. He would carry her to the other bank. What the young man ignored was that the old woman was in fact goddess Hera in disguise, the wife of Zeus. Hera was not inclined to help mortals, especially when they were born from the infidelities of her husband. But it was not the case for Jason, and she had been touched by the tragic fate of his family. She was also irritated by Peleus the usurper, who was a son of Poseidon, because she also had a feud with the god of the sea. And so she had decided to test Jason. Hera was all about good morals and respect of traditions. Jason's willingness to help an old woman that would tell her if he was deserving of her support. Of course, because he had a good heart and had been well educated by Charon, Jason did not hesitate to help her, and they crossed the river together. But during the crossing, he lost one of his sandals that was taken away by the stream. On the other side, Hera, who knew what awaited the hero, blessed him and decided she would support the young prince. When Jason arrived in Iolcus, the guards saw that he only wore one sandal. So they immediately warned Peleus, and the young man was brought to him. Jason did not see the point of hiding who he was, So he immediately informed Peleus that he was the rightful king and had come back to claim what was his. Peleus knew, thanks to the prophecy, that this was the truth, and the priests of Hera arrived to announce that their goddess had extended her protection to Jason. It was impossible to get rid of him and offend the goddess who was famous for being merciless and hold on to grudges. But what Peleus could do was submit Jason to a test to prove his worth in the hope that he would fail. And that's what he did. He told the prince the throne would be his if he found and brought back the Golden Fleece. The Golden Fleece was a well-known symbol of authority and kingship that had grown on a sacred winged ram, a creature of Poseidon, and had been kept after the ram was sacrificed to Zeus. It was now the property of a king, Aeetes, who kept it hanging on a tree in a sacred grove under the guard of a dragon. An Aeetes kingdom, Colchis, was far to the sea in the mountains of the Caucasus, on the oriental shores of the Black Sea. It was obvious that obtaining the Golden Fleece was far in hostile lands and defended by a monster would be nearly impossible. Who knew what dangers awaited the man who would embark on such a quest? But because he was courageous and the alternative was to leave Iolcus empty-handed and humiliated, Jason did not hesitate. He accepted the challenge. He would travel far to the east and face all dangers to bring back the prize and get the throne he owned by birthright. Jason could have left immediately, but he was far too smart for that. He knew that he would need a ship to reach the faraway kingdom of Colchis, and no one had said he needed to go on this quest alone. So instead, he spent weeks recruiting young men who would accompany him, and he found about 20, starting with Argus, an aspiring shipbuilder. Argus immediately began working on a new ship that could carry them to their destination. And as he drew the plans and started carving timber, he was inspired by goddess Athena. As always, Athena was willing to help young heroes who faced enormous dangers on their quests. So she guided Argus and helped him create the most seaworthy ship ever seen. There was even a piece of sacred oak on the prow of the ship that could speak in times of danger and advise the crew on what to do. This extraordinary ship was named the Argo after its builder, and it would transport the group, the Argonauts, on their quest. Then there were extraordinary warriors who joined Jason, like Heracles, who had not yet accomplished his labors but was already extraordinarily strong and brave. Or the twins, Castor and Polydeuces, future kings like Peleus or Augeas, the same Augeas whose gigantic stables Heracles would have to clean as one of his labors. There was also Orpheus, before he met Eurydice, whose tragic fate we just relived, and a dozen more youths also dreaming of adventure and exploits. All were gifted either in the arts of fighting or sailing. After a few weeks, the expedition was ready, and they sailed to the northeast. They would cross the Straits of Bosphorus, which separated Thrace from Asia, enter the Black Sea, and sail east to the kingdom of Colchis, where their prize was awaiting, and then back to Iolcus. The crew needed to make several stops to replenish their food and water, and their first stop was on the Isle of Lemnos, off the shore of Asia. To their surprise, the Argonauts found only women on the island. There was not one man alive, but this had not always been the case. The women of Lemnos had actually killed all the men. Why? These women had neglected their worship of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Aphrodite was a loving and sweet goddess, but only as long as she received proper worship. And she had decided to punish these women who took her support for granted. So she had made them repulsive to their husbands, who no longer stood being near them. And the husbands had taken lovers outside the island. Far from accepting this punishment and trying to regain the favor of Aphrodite as retribution, the women had killed all the men in their sleep, and now they lived without men. The Argonauts arrived in Lemnos just when the women were regretting this whole situation, and they mingled with them, fathering numerous children. Staying in Lemnos could have been a temptation, but they had a mission waiting, so they decided to depart after a first stop that was arguably not dangerous nor glorious. Their second stop was way more dangerous. They approached the Strait of Bosphorus, and they soon needed to make a halt on the coast of the land we now call Turkey. This was the land of the Doliones, a welcoming and peaceful people, and their king offered hospitality. He let the Argonauts search for supplies, but they omitted to tell them that they shared the land with a tribe of aggressive giants who had 6 arms, which made them very dangerous opponents. The giants and the Doliones were at peace, but when the giants saw that most of the Argonauts had gone into the forest to look for supplies, they decided to raid their ship. Because their truce with the Doliones did not extend to foreigners, only Heracles had stayed with the Argo to protect it, and he had to face, alone, a whole group of giants. A horrible fight ensued, and by the time the Argonauts returned to the ship, Heracles was still fighting the attackers. They all re-embarked hastily, losing their supplies and even more bearings than they had on the ship. When night came, the crew agreed that they could not leave this place with less than what they had when they arrived. They decided to land again at the same spot to at least recover what they had lost. But when they did, in the darkness, the Doliones took them for enemies, and they started attacking them too. The Argonauts killed many of the Doliones, including their king, and it was only when dawn came that both sides realized their tragic mistake. Again, the Argonauts left. For the moment, they had only spent time on an island full of women and accidentally killed their host on their second stop. This was far from glorious. Morale was now low on the Argo. A somber silence had replaced the laughs and bragging of the first days, and Jason hoped his crew would soon get an occasion to restore its confidence and prove its worth. This occasion soon arrived. Their last stop before passing the straits of the Bosphorus was a kingdom of Thrace. This kingdom suffered from a plague. A group of harpies, half human and half bird women, who constantly harassed people and stole food. The king was desperate and asked for the help of the Argonauts to chase the harpies away. They did, and the grateful king revealed to Jason the exact location of their destination, Colchis, where the Golden Fleece was kept, and even more importantly, how to pass to Bosphorus. Because in those times there were two clashing rocks in the straits, two huge rock cliffs animated by a spirit of destruction. The only way was between the two cliffs, and any time something tried to pass between them, they came together and crushed it before returning to their initial position. The speed of the crashing rocks made it impossible for ships to cross and enter or exit the Black Sea on the other side. The king recommended Jason release a dove when they would be near the rocks, this to tell them whether there was hope or not. If the dove was crushed, they were doomed to fail because no ship could be faster than a dove. But if the bird could fly fast enough, then maybe, if they rowed with all their might, they could make it through. As advised, Jason released the dove and it avoided being crushed, losing only a few tail feathers. This meant that the Argo would need to go through the strait as fast as a dove. The crew started to row furiously to gain as much speed as possible. Any other ship than the Argo could not have gained enough speed. But thanks to the perfect design inspired by Athena and the strength of the Argonauts, their ship reached the necessary speed. By a small margin, it made it through with only minor damage at the stern of the ship, where the two rocks clashed just behind them. The Argo had entered the Black Sea, and the road to Colchis was now open. After a few days of uneventful navigation, the Argonauts arrived on the coast of a land that we now call Georgia. The fleece was owned by King Hades of Colchis, who had no intention of letting it go. But given the prestige of Jason and his companions, the first group to ever reach his kingdom by sea, and also their divine support, Hera had blessed Jason and Athena had inspired the building of the Argo. The king deemed it more appropriate to ask Jason to perform several tasks that he knew were impossible to achieve. This way the young hero would fail, and he would keep the Golden Fleece without offending the powerful goddesses that supported him. Presented with these tasks, Jason became completely discouraged. They were just too hard, and life seemed to repeat itself. He was already on this quest as a task given by Peleus. Hera had closely followed the adventures of her protege and decided that it was time to offer support. King Hades had a daughter, Medea, who was not only a ravishing young woman, but also a powerful priestess, prophetess, and sorceress. She could read the ways of destiny. She was familiar with the kingdom of Colchis. She had powers, and so she could be of great help to Jason. To obtain her help, Hera thought of the shortest and best way: love. Goddess Aphrodite owed her a favor, and so she asked her to send her little son, Eros, the god who could inspire love between mortals, to make sure Medea's heart would be bound to Jason's. It was done as schemed by Hera, and Medea fell in love with the stranger. She resolved to help him as much as she could to save him from the dangers of the tasks he had to accomplish. Indeed, the tasks looked almost impossible. First, Jason had to plow a field using fire-breathing oxen. These oxen were furious. They refused to have the yoke put on them and had burned alive anyone trying to tame them. Using her knowledge of herbs and potions, Medea made an ointment that could protect Jason from the oxen's flames. Thanks to the help of the young woman, Jason could plow the field and survive. The second task was a trap. The king had asked Jason to sow the fields with the teeth of a dragon. What he had omitted to say was that from the dragon's teeth, an army of ferocious warriors would sprout immediately. It was obvious that they could kill Jason despite all his strength and bravery. Medea knew this, and had previously warned Jason of her father's plan. She also told him how to defeat this foe. When the warriors would appear from the ground, he would have to throw a rock between them. The warriors were powerful but stupid. They could not distinguish friend from foe, and they would be confused by the rock falling on one of them. So they would attack and defeat each other. Jason followed Medea's instructions and, as she had said, the warriors entered into a furious rage, starting to fight each other until none was left. Thanks to Medea, Jason had once again triumphed over the second task. The third and last task to retrieve the Golden Fleece, despite the dragon that guarded it. The dragon never slept, and there was apparently no way of taking the fleece without fighting it. But it was such a formidable opponent that no man could hope to defeat it, even Heracles. Again, Medea saved the day. She prepared a potion, a filter of sleep distilled from herbs, so powerful that even the sleepless dragon would not be able to stay awake. Armed only with the potion, Jason went into the sacred grove and found the dragon. The fleece was hanging on a tree, its gold shining like the sun. The dragon was waiting for intruders at the foot of the tree, and it immediately attacked. Jason just had time to avoid it and spray it with the potion. In a few heartbeats, the potion worked, and for the first time ever, the dragon fell asleep. Jason seized the fleece and rejoined Medea. The two had planned to escape immediately, because they knew that King Hades would never allow them to leave together with his precious fleece. To distract the king, Medea didn't hesitate to kill her own brother and hide the body. This would slow down their pursuers. As planned, they re-embark on the Argo with the Golden Fleece and all their companions, and sailed west to put as much distance as possible between them and Colchis, where King Hades lamented the loss of his son, his daughter, and his precious fleece. The return journey would not be easy. The gods had closely followed the events unfolding in Colchis. Hera and Athena were satisfied to see their champion prevail. But the murder of Medea's brother was a very dishonorable action in the eyes of Zeus, and the king of gods decided to punish the Argonauts. Even though it was essentially Medea's initiative, he sent a series of storms to keep the Argo that blew it off course. The crew was distraught. How could they appease the king of gods? The solution came from the Argo itself that could speak, as we saw before. The ship revealed that they had to seek purification with Circe, a nymph living on an island close to their position. They visited Circe, obtained purification from her, and could resume their journey. Jason and Medea now formed a couple, but the rest of the crew looked at the enchantress with a bit of defiance. She had been made to fall in love with Jason, and not the other way around. The young woman seemed to be ready to do anything to meet her woes, as the murder of her brother had shown. Given her powers, this made her a dangerous, almost frightening figure. But for now, they were all in the same boat, literally, and they needed to return to Iolcos with the Golden Fleece for Jason to claim his throne. The next obstacle on their way was a group of 3 small islands that they had to cross. These islands had the sweetest of dangers. They were populated by the sirens. These creatures could be taken for harpies because they were also half woman, half bird appearance. But whereas the harpies croaked, the sirens had the most melodious voices. They sang to the ships that passed by, and their songs were so beautiful and attractive that the sailors would become obsessed, mesmerized, and let their ships crash into the islands. After which the sirens attacked the shipwrecks and ate the unfortunate sailors. But there was one Argonaut who could save them all, and who understood the threat: Orpheus. Orpheus traveled with his lyre, and as soon as the sirens started their song, he drew it. What any other man could have been unable to achieve, he achieved. He started playing music that was at the same time louder and more beautiful than the sirens. His companions would listen to him instead of the sirens' bewitching songs, and the Argo could pass safely near the islands. Only a few days later, they sailed near another dangerous island, where another being lived, Talos, the bronze man. Long ago, Talos had been created by Hephaestus, the gold blacksmith. He was entirely made of metal, and so could not be wounded or defeated. Talos also had considerable strength and was aggressive. He started throwing rocks at the Argo, threatening to destroy it entirely. The Argo was saved this time by Medea, her knowledge and her powers. She knew that Talos had one weakness. He had one blood vessel which went from his neck to his ankle, bound by only one bronze nail. The sorceress cast a spell on the bronze man to calm him. Then she coldly removed the bronze nail and let him bleed to death. The Argo was able to sail on, but even though Medea had saved them, the Argonauts looked at her with even more worry. What would she be capable of? Finally, after all these adventures, they reach Iolcus with the Golden Fleece. Peleus was now a very old man, and he had to accept that the throne was Jason's. It now seemed obvious that Jason would become king. But the story was not over. Not yet. Medea's dark side was about to derail everything. Jason was reunited with his father, Aeson, who was now very old, and the shadow of death could almost be seen on his face. Medea offered to extend his life because such was her power. The sorceress withdrew the blood from Aeson's body and infused it with herbs. Then she put it back into his veins, returning vigor to him. Everyone marveled at this wonder, and as proof of goodwill, the daughters of Peleus asked Medea to do the same for their father. Medea claimed that she could do even better. She could make their father as smooth and vigorous as a child by chopping him up into pieces and boiling the pieces in a cauldron of water and magical herbs. She demonstrated this was possible. She asked them to choose the oldest ram in their flock. They brought it. The animal was chopped up and boiled inside the cauldron, from which it emerged as a lamb extraordinary. The girls were naive and had not perceived that Medea could be very cruel. They sliced and diced their old father and put his remains in the cauldron. But Medea did not add the magical herbs to the recipe, and so Peleus was just turned into a stew of human flesh. This cruel act horrified the entire city of Iolcus, and it was decided that Medea and Jason would be banished for their crime. After saving Jason and almost making him a king, Medea became the cause of his downfall. The couple had to leave Iolcus and settle in Corinth. The situation between them would not improve. Jason increasingly distanced himself from her, and eventually they split up. Medea went as far as killing a princess whom Jason intended to marry for revenge before fleeing Corinth and going to Athens. In Athens, Medea seduced the king and became his consort. As a result of breaking with Medea, Jason lost the favor of Hera. He had disappointed the goddess because she had made efforts to bring them together, and she didn't like to see her plans disturbed. His life of adventure was over and ended in loneliness and bitterness. New heroes like Theseus, Heracles, or Orpheus now interested the gods and called for their attention. Forgotten by the gods and without a throne, Jason lived and slept near the rotting Argo, the last remnant of his glory. One day, as he slept under the stern of the ship, the stern fell on him and killed him. There would be no happy ending to this story. So this one didn't turn out better than Orpheus in the end. For now, our little journey to mythological times is over for tonight. You can now let go and fall asleep. Or, if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.